It was the middle of summer when it all started. I'd been running my business for over 30 years, selling real estate, managing properties, and ensuring that everything was running smoothly. Life had been good to me. I had a loving wife, two grown children, and a goddaughter, Sarah, who was like the daughter I never had. Everything seemed fine, until one summer day, it all came crashing down. It was a day like any other when I woke up feeling off. I had a dull headache, and my muscles felt sore, but nothing too alarming. I figured I had just overworked myself, maybe pushed a little too hard the day before, you know? But as the day wore on, things got worse. By midday, I was feeling feverish, real bad. My temperature soared to nearly 40 degrees Celsius, and I started to lose track of time. Everything felt like it was happening in a haze. My thoughts were blurry, and I felt completely drained. Now, I wasn't one to fuss about a little illness, but this was different. I knew something wasn't right. My wife, Mary, was out of town visiting family, so I was alone. At least, I thought I was. I tried to get up to grab some water, but my legs felt like lead, and I collapsed back into bed. That's when Sarah showed up. She was always a good kid, always checking in on me. She'd stopped by a couple of times over the past week to ask how things were going with the business, especially with the new office we'd just opened. Sarah had this way about her, kind, warm, always smiling, and always eager to help. She had recently started working with me on some of the smaller deals, learning the ropes of the family business. I thought, well, if anyone's going to carry on the family legacy one day, it's going to be Sarah. "Godfather, you look terrible," she said, coming into my room with a concerned expression. I could barely manage a weak smile. "I feel like I'm dying," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. She came over and helped me sit up in bed, placing a cool cloth on my forehead. "Don't worry, Godfather," she said in that sweet voice of hers. "I'll take care of you." She left the room for a moment and came back with a glass of what I assumed was water. "Here," she said, "drink this. It'll help you feel better." I barely had the strength to hold the glass, but I managed. The cool liquid hit my throat like a burst of ice, but something about it felt off. I didn't think much of it at the time. Fever can make you feel disoriented, and I didn't want to be rude or make her feel like she was doing something wrong. She was just trying to help, so I drank it. "You're the best, Sarah," I murmured as the drink slid down my throat, burning slightly. At first I thought it was just my fever messing with me, but as the liquid settled, I started feeling a little more awake. Maybe even a bit more energized, but that wasn't right either. "That's it, just rest now," she said, gently patting my arm. "I'll be back in a bit. Just rest, okay?" She gave me a reassuring smile and left the room, closing the door behind her. For a while, I drifted in and out of sleep. The fever was getting worse, but I didn't have the strength to call anyone or even move. I was completely at her mercy. I couldn't help but think how lucky I was to have Sarah around, how she always knew what to do, what a good kid she was. I kept telling myself that over and over as I drifted in and out of consciousness. But it was around an hour later when things took a strange turn. My vision became blurry, and I started to feel an intense heat. Even though I was under the covers, my head was spinning. And then I started to feel weird. There was something about my chest. My heart was racing and I couldn't catch my breath. I was getting dizzy. Was it the fever? Or was it something else? That's when I heard her again, Sarah. She came back into the room, her figure silhouetted against the light. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice soft, but there was something in it that felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. She handed me another glass, and this time I hesitated. "What is this?" I asked, my voice thick with confusion. "Just a little something to help with the fever," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "You need to drink more water, Godfather. You're dehydrated." Now, it might have been the fever messing with my judgment, but I still had enough sense to feel something wasn't right. The first drink burned, but it wasn't water. It had been alcohol. Vodka, to be exact. I didn't know what to think, but I didn't have the energy to question her. And she was so insistent. My hand trembled as I reached out for the glass, my body weak and vulnerable. What else was I supposed to do? I was exhausted, my body fighting the fever. And Sarah, my goddaughter, the one I had always trusted, was right there, offering help. "Just one more drink, Godfather," she urged, her smile almost too bright. "It'll help you sleep. You'll feel better in the morning." I took a sip, feeling the burn again. It wasn't like the water I had expected, but the heat it gave me somehow made my head clearer, or at least it felt like it. I closed my eyes, thinking that if I just rested, it would all pass. Little did I know, I had just taken the first step down a path I never saw coming. A path that would end with me losing everything I had worked for, all because I trusted the wrong person at my most vulnerable moment. As I lay there, feeling the heat of the fever and the strange warmth of the vodka in my veins, I couldn't help but think, how could I have been so blind? How could I have let myself be manipulated so easily? But that was the beginning of something far worse than I could have imagined. Something that would change my life and my business forever. I just didn't know it yet. The fever had finally begun to subside, but my mind was still a jumbled mess. The world around me felt distorted, like everything was happening in a foggy haze. The temperature in the room was sweltering, and I could feel beads of sweat clinging to my forehead as I struggled to make sense of my surroundings. My body felt like lead, each movement slow and laborious, as though the weight of the fever had become a part of me. My head was spinning, and my thoughts scattered in all directions. I could barely concentrate long enough to form a coherent sentence, and the only thing I could focus on was the unbearable heat in my body and the exhaustion that seemed to seep into my very bones. I tried to sit up, but my limbs were heavy, and I could feel the dizziness threatening to send me back into a restless slumber. I had been drifting in and out of consciousness for what seemed like hours. I couldn't tell if it was day or night, and the noise of the world outside my bedroom felt distant, muffled by the fever that clouded my senses. My thoughts, as fragmented as they were, kept returning to the same question. What was happening to me? Then Sarah appeared again. She had been a constant presence throughout the day, coming in and out of the room to check on me, offering me water, and giving me the occasional reassuring word. She was my goddaughter, after all, and I had trusted her completely. Her soft voice had been a comfort in the chaos of my fever, and the way she fussed over me, making sure I was comfortable, gave me the illusion of care. But as I looked at her now, a nagging feeling crept into my chest, a feeling I couldn't quite place. She had a piece of paper in her hand, a form that looked official enough. It was a standard document, at least that's what I thought. It had medical terms written across the top, a hospital logo, and what looked like a line for a signature at the bottom. For a moment, I wondered why she was holding it out to me. It didn't look like anything I had seen before, but the fever made everything seem distant and unreal. "Godfather?" Sarah's voice was calm, too calm. "I need you to sign something for the doctor. It's just a form to authorize the medication they'll be giving you. It's nothing major, just a quick signature. The doctor needs it to make sure you get the right treatment." She spoke softly, reassuringly, as though there was nothing to worry about. Her eyes met mine, full of concern, but her expression was so practiced, so perfect, that I couldn't help but wonder, even for a moment, if I was seeing the full truth of it. I looked at the paper again. It didn't seem to require anything complicated. The medical jargon was lost on me in my current state, and I couldn't make sense of the terms scattered across the document. My focus kept wavering, and all I wanted was for this fever to end so I could rest in peace. I trusted Sarah implicitly. Why wouldn't I? She had always been so kind, so attentive. She was family. But deep down, something didn't feel quite right. Still, I couldn't find the strength to question her. I was exhausted. The heat in my body seemed to be burning through my skin, and the pain was nearly unbearable. I had no energy to argue or ask for more details. My head felt too clouded to focus on the fine print. All I could think about was getting better, getting some rest, and letting someone else handle the complexities of whatever this paper might be. "It's for your own good, Godfather," Sarah repeated, a soft smile on her face. "Just a quick signature. You can go back to sleep right after. I promise." Her voice was smooth, persuasive, and I was too weak to resist. My hand felt like it was made of stone as I reached out to take the pen. It was heavy in my fingers, trembling with the effort. And as I signed my name across the bottom of the form, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It was done. It was over. I could close my eyes and finally rest. "Thank you, Godfather," Sarah said as she carefully took the paper from my hands. There was something almost too sincere in her gratitude, and it sent a slight chill through me. She gave me a gentle pat on the arm, and I nodded weakly, too tired to speak. As she left the room, I lay there in silence, staring up at the ceiling. The pain in my body had started to ebb, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. That nagging sensation, the feeling that something wasn't quite right, continued to claw at me. But the fog in my mind was still too thick for me to grasp anything clearly. I closed my eyes again, trying to push the discomfort away, but I couldn't forget the way Sarah had acted. The way she had been so calm, so sure of herself, as though she were in complete control of the situation. It wasn't until later, when the fever had fully broken and my mind began to clear, that I realized the full extent of what I had just done. That paper I had signed, those few lines of ink, had been far more than a simple authorization for my treatment. In my weakened state, I had signed away everything I had worked for, my business, my properties, my life's work. Sarah now had the legal right to it all. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so vulnerable, so sick, that I didn't even see it coming. My goddaughter had taken advantage of my state of mind, and in my desperate attempt to feel better, I had unknowingly handed her the keys to my empire. I couldn't believe what had just happened. How had I been so blind? How could I have let this happen to me? But there was no turning back now. The damage had been done, and I had signed away my future without even knowing it. As the days passed and I regained my strength, the full scope of Sarah's betrayal became painfully clear. I had been deceived, and there was nothing I could do to change it, at least not yet. The days of fever, delirium, and confusion were finally behind me. I was starting to feel the faintest glimmer of clarity, like a fog slowly lifting from my mind, allowing the world to come back into focus. I could sit up now, and for the first time in what felt like forever, my thoughts weren't clouded by the burning fever that had gripped me for so long. But that sense of relief didn't last long. Something wasn't right. The stillness in the room, the unnerving quiet of the house, made my gut twist in a way I couldn't explain. I stared at the ceiling, my eyes tracing the old cracks in the plaster as I took in deep breaths, trying to center myself. My body was weak, but my mind was sharp. As the room remained unnaturally silent, my thoughts wandered back to the day Sarah had visited me while I was at my weakest. I could still feel the warmth of the vodka burning down my throat, the sharp sting of alcohol mixing with the dizziness of my fever. I had trusted Sarah, my goddaughter, always had. She was family after all. Family couldn't betray you, right? But as I lay there, trying to push away the growing unease, I remembered the moment she had handed me the paper. "It's just for the hospital pills," she had said. Her voice had been so soothing, and I, barely able to think straight, had taken it from her without question. She told me it was just a formality, something to help with the medication, and I, still disoriented from the fever, hadn't even thought to ask more about it. What could it hurt, right? Now, sitting up in bed, that memory felt like a cold weight pressing against my chest. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. In my delirium, I had signed that paper. But it wasn't just some innocuous medical form, was it? Number. I hadn't realized it at the time, but that signature had cost me everything. My heart sank as the realization hit me like a slap to the face. Sarah hadn't been there out of concern for my health. She hadn't been the caring, devoted goddaughter I thought she was. No, she had been waiting for the moment when I was vulnerable, waiting for the moment when I wouldn't be able to defend myself. She had played me, and I had let her. I closed my eyes, the anger slowly building inside me. How could she do this? How could she take advantage of me, of all people? My goddaughter, the girl I had watched grow up, the girl I had trusted with everything. She had been there during the good times, always smiling, always so sweet. But now I saw the truth. I saw the cold calculation in her eyes that I had never noticed before. The kindness she had shown me had been a lie, a well-crafted act designed to lull me into a false sense of security. I thought about the business I had built from the ground up, the empire I had worked so hard to create, the years I had spent laboring, the sacrifices I had made. I thought about the life I had lived and the legacy I had hoped to leave behind. And I realized, in that moment, that I had just handed it all over to her without a second thought. I felt the sting of betrayal deeper than I had ever imagined. Sarah hadn't just taken something from me. She had taken my future, the future of my company, of my hard-earned wealth, of everything I had spent decades building, and she had done it with a smile, with the perfect mask of concern, all while knowing exactly what she was doing. The anger in me surged. The reality of the situation was starting to settle in, and with it, a creeping sense of dread. There was no turning back now. The damage had been done. I had been tricked, duped into signing over everything I had. But as I sat there, feeling the bitterness of betrayal gnawing at my insides, I realized something else. I wasn't completely powerless. I wasn't finished. If there was one thing I had learned in my years of business, it was that things weren't always as they seemed. I had made mistakes, yes, but I still had the tools to fight back. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I thought about how quickly everything had happened. It hadn't taken much for her to take control. Just a little bit of patience, a well-timed visit when I was too weak to resist. She had slipped that paper in front of me, knowing full well I wouldn't be able to process what it meant. I had trusted her, and she had exploited that trust. But I wasn't going to lie down and let her take everything from me. No, I would find a way to expose her for the fraud she was. I would make sure she paid for what she had done. I couldn't undo what had been done in that moment of weakness, but I could make sure she didn't get away with it. I knew I had to act fast. She thought she had outsmarted me, that I would just fade away into the background as she took control. But she didn't know me. She didn't know what I was capable of when I was backed into a corner. I wasn't about to let her turn my life's work into her own personal plaything. The fury inside me began to morph into something more cold and calculating. This wasn't over. I would make sure she knew that. I had a plan. She had made a fatal mistake by underestimating me. I was going to get back what was mine, and I was going to make her pay for every ounce of trust she had betrayed. I sat there for a while, letting the anger wash over me, and in the stillness of that moment, I made a decision. The fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning. And Sarah, my goddaughter, the one person I had trusted the most, was going to pay the price for what she had done. It was time for me to take back control. The days that followed the terrible realization were a blur of anger, disbelief, and a deep, smoldering sense of betrayal. But soon, as the fog of shock began to lift, I found something else replacing the initial hurt. It was a quiet, determined clarity, a burning desire to make Sarah pay for what she had done. She thought she had won. She thought she had taken everything from me, but I wasn't going to let it end like that. Not by a long shot. This was not a matter of pride, not a matter of some childish need for revenge. No, this was about principle, about protecting everything I had spent my life building: business, family, legacy. I had worked tirelessly, sacrificed so much to ensure that my name, my company, and my assets would endure for generations. I had no intention of letting a spoiled, scheming relative destroy it all in a moment of deceit. But I knew I couldn't just storm in and confront Sarah. That would play into her hands. She had already outsmarted me once, using my vulnerability against me. If I acted rashly, I'd be playing her game. Instead, I needed to think this through carefully, to be methodical. I had to be patient. In my experience, patience was often the most powerful weapon. I spent hours in my study, sitting in my favorite old leather chair, the one that had seen countless decisions made and business deals struck over the years. The familiar scent of polished wood and old books filled the air as I looked over my scattered notes and papers. My mind was racing, but I knew I had to approach this with precision. The first order of business was to gather as much evidence as I could. I couldn't rely on my word alone. No, I needed solid, undeniable proof that would show Sarah for the scheming liar she was. Every document I'd signed while sick, every legal file, every letter, everything needed to be copied, cataloged, and stored away for future use. But I also knew that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. I had to outmaneuver her. I needed to get her to trust me again, even if it was just for a moment. She was convinced she had won. She thought she had successfully taken over everything that belonged to me. That was my opening. She would never expect what I was planning. If I was smart, I could use her overconfidence to my advantage. I sat back in the chair, staring at the desk for what felt like an eternity. My thoughts bounced from one plan to another, trying to find the right course of action. The solution came to me in a quiet, almost unexpected moment. I would fake my death. It was bold, it was risky, but it was perfect. Sarah would be devastated by the news of my passing. She'd believe that she had inherited everything, that she was now the rightful heir to my business and wealth. But what she didn't know was that the moment she thought she had everything in her grasp would be the very moment I set the trap. I had already spent enough time thinking about how I would make it believable. It wasn't going to be some hastily thrown together lie. No, I would need witnesses. I would need my most trusted friends to play along, people she wouldn't suspect for a moment. A doctor, perhaps, a lawyer, maybe even a few close business associates. All of them would help me create a convincing story. I needed to make it look as real as possible. The plan was simple. I would wait for Sarah to lower her guard, thinking that she had won. Once she believed I was gone, she would begin to make the moves she thought were her right. That's when I would strike. I would have everything in place: documents, witness testimony, and the most important piece of all, Sarah's signature on a document that would expose her for the fraud she truly was. It was a calculated risk, but I felt a strange sense of calmness as I outlined the steps. I knew it had to be done with perfect timing. If I acted too soon, Sarah would be suspicious. If I waited too long, she might solidify her position too much for me to take back what I'd lost. No, the moment had to be just right, and I was willing to wait. I began drafting my letter. It was a letter that would not only serve as a final statement, but also as a symbol of my return. It needed to be clear, it needed to be direct, and it had to leave no room for doubt. I wasn't just writing a goodbye. I was setting the stage for my resurrection. It would be a statement that showed Sarah for what she was, a woman who thought she could use my weakness to her advantage. Little did she know that, in the end, it would be her own greed and carelessness that would lead to her downfall. As I wrote, the words came easily. The anger that had once clouded my thoughts now turned into a laser-focused determination. I was no longer a weak, feverish man tricked into signing away his legacy. I was the mastermind, the one in control. Sarah had made a grave mistake, and it was time to turn the tables. The letter I was writing was a key part of the puzzle. It would be the final piece that would expose her. But it wasn't just about the letter itself. It was about everything I was setting into motion. When I would die, she would think it was over. But in reality, the game would be just beginning. I finished the letter and signed it with a final flourish, the ink drying as I sat back in my chair, reflecting on the enormity of the steps I was about to take. The satisfaction I felt wasn't one of gloating. It was the quiet, cold satisfaction of knowing that I was in control now. I had been outsmarted once, but it wouldn't happen again. This time, I was the one pulling the strings. I looked down at the letter once more, imagining Sarah's face when she would read it. She'd be certain that I was gone, that she had won. But what she didn't know was that I was already one step ahead. Her triumph was nothing but an illusion. And when the time came, I would rise again, exposing her for the fraud she was, taking back everything she had stolen, and ensuring that my legacy would remain intact. The plan was simple: fake my death, get her to sign the wrong documents, and then hit her with the truth when she was least expecting it. I smiled to myself as I envisioned her reaction. It would be the last thing she ever expected. The day had arrived. It was time to put the plan into motion. Everything was set, every detail meticulously thought out, every step mapped. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, perhaps longer than I had ever anticipated. In my mind, I knew that this was my one and only chance to expose Sarah's treachery and take back what was rightfully mine. There was no room for error. I had already made the necessary arrangements with my lawyer and a trusted family friend, someone who could help orchestrate the illusion of my death. They would be the ones to confirm the cause of death in front of everyone, an unfortunate, yet understandable heart attack brought on by the stress and emotional strain I had been under. A reasonable explanation, believable enough to fool anyone. As the day approached, I made sure to spend some time with Sarah, to give her the sense that everything was still normal between us. She had no idea what was coming. She would play her part without even realizing she was being set up. She continued to act as though everything was fine, offering me comfort and kind words, pretending to care as much as she always had. But underneath that act, I could see the ambition burning in her eyes. She wasn't just my goddaughter anymore. She was a vulture waiting to feast on what she thought was already hers. I waited until nightfall to execute the plan. In the early evening, I retired to my bed, pretending to be weaker than I truly felt. The fever had long since passed, and I felt much better, but the act needed to be convincing. I made sure to appear frail, weak, and unwell, lying motionless in the bed, eyes closed, breathing shallowly. I wasn't going to just lie there and wait. I had to make it look real. Sarah, of course, had no reason to doubt me. She had seen me weak before, after all. The slow rise and fall of my chest was a familiar sight to her, but this time it was different. This time, I wasn't just sick, I was dead. I had arranged for a close friend to inform her that I had passed. He was a doctor, someone I had known for years, and someone who could confirm my death with a professional demeanor. The news hit Sarah hard. She cried, she screamed, she was devastated. I watched her from the corner of the room, staying perfectly still as she rushed to my side, her sobs filling the room. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. But then I remembered everything she had done. I had to remind myself that this was the only way to get justice. Sarah had no idea that behind her grief, I was already waiting for the perfect moment. It was all about timing. When she had calmed down, when the initial shock had worn off, and she believed that she had inherited everything, that's when I would make my move. Hours passed. People began to gather around, offering condolences, speaking in hushed tones. I kept my eyes shut, my face pale and lifeless. The sound of Sarah's voice, so full of sorrow, almost made me falter. But I stayed still, focused on the end game. Finally, the time came. Sarah stood at the foot of my bed, looking over my lifeless body. Her face was pained, but also strangely satisfied. She thought she had won. She believed that everything was now hers, my business, my money, my legacy. She couldn't have been more wrong. With a sense of finality in the air, I beckoned her over to my side. Her eyes widened in surprise, and I could see her hesitation. But she wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. She rushed to my side, her face now a mixture of concern and eager anticipation. "I need to speak with you, Godfather," I whispered hoarsely, though I could barely manage the words. My voice, though weak, was intentional. It had to sound like I was on the verge of my last breath. "Of course, Godfather. Anything," she replied, bending closer, her hand trembling as it reached out to touch mine. "I've only got an hour left," I said, my voice barely audible but sharp enough for her to hear. "I need to appoint you as the CEO of my company." Her eyes sparkled and she didn't even hesitate. The moment she thought she had everything in her grasp, she eagerly agreed, perhaps more relieved than I had anticipated. She was hungry for power, and this was the final piece. She signed the papers without a second thought, believing she had just secured her position as the new head of my empire. At that moment, I felt a strange satisfaction, a bitter sense of triumph. The trap had been set. I had successfully manipulated the situation. My goddaughter, convinced she was now in control, had signed her own fate without even realizing it. She didn't know that what she had just put her name to wasn't a transfer of power. It was her undoing. The document wasn't the one she thought it was. No, it was evidence of her betrayal, a trap that would expose her once and for all. As she looked down at the paper she had just signed, I could feel a sense of finality in the air. She had no idea that the moment she thought she had achieved victory was the very moment she sealed her doom. She had fallen right into the trap, and now it was time for me to take back what was rightfully mine. All that was left was for the world to see the truth. There she stood, holding the signed document, her expression shifting from confidence to confusion. Sarah couldn't believe what she had just done. The paper she thought would solidify her control over my company was not what it seemed. In fact, it was the very evidence that would expose her betrayal. Her eyes scanned the document frantically, and the truth slowly began to hit her. She had unknowingly signed away her own future. I had set the perfect trap. The papers she had signed were not about transferring power to her. They were proof of her deceit, carefully crafted to ruin her. Panic set in. Her face went pale, and her hands began to shake as the realization hit. She had thought she was the winner, but instead, she had sealed her own fate. The room grew heavy with silence, and I could almost hear her heart racing as the weight of her mistake sank in. There was no escape now. In that moment, I felt a sense of justice. I had outsmarted her. Sarah's greed had led her to this point, but now it was time for her to face the consequences. She had lost, and I would take back what was rightfully mine.